The sound of shattering porcelain didn't just break the silence. It sliced right through the polite murmur of 200 guests. I froze, my hand still hovering over Elena's shoulder where I had been guiding her through the crowded ballroom. At my feet lay the shards of a vintage Ming vase, a prop my mother Patricia insisted on displaying near the heavy oak doors every Christmas Eve. Elena, my 6-year-old daughter, stood trembling, her eyes wide and already filling with tears. She hadn't even been running. She had just turned too quickly to look at the massive tree, and her small elbow had clipped the pedestal. The music stopped. The chatter died instantly. And then my father's voice boomed across the room, louder than I had ever heard it. "You clumsy little idiot!" James roared, striding toward us, his face flushed a deep, dangerous crimson. "That vase is worth more than your mother makes in a decade." He didn't check if Elena was hurt. He didn't ask what happened. He loomed over us, his expensive tuxedo straining as he pointed a shaking finger at my daughter. "James, please," I started, stepping between him and Elena, my voice low, trying to salvage some shred of dignity. "It was an accident. I'll pay for it." "Pay for it?" He laughed, a harsh barking sound that echoed off the high ceilings. "With what, Catalina? Your freelance graphic design scraps? You can't even afford decent clothes for this party, let alone a piece of history like that." My mother, Patricia, stood a few feet away, sipping her champagne. She didn't move. She didn't intervene. She just watched, her expression one of mild annoyance, as if we were a stain on her perfect carpet that she hadn't gotten around to cleaning yet. "You are a cheap embarrassment," my father spat, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss that carried to every corner of the silent room. "Every time you come here you ruin something. You ruin the aesthetic. You ruin the mood. And now you destroy my property." He grabbed my arm, his grip bruising. "Get out. Get out, you piece of trash. Take your brat and leave before my important guests arrive." He shoved me. Physically shoved me toward the door. I stumbled, catching myself against the wall, pulling Elena tight against my side. The elite of Montecito watched. Bankers, socialites, investors, all witnessing James's expulsion of his own daughter and granddaughter. Not one person spoke up. My brother Jack smirked from the bar. My sister Taylor didn't even look up from her phone. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. Something inside me, some fragile hope I had been nurturing for 29 years, finally snapped. It was a physical sensation, a sharp, clean break in the center of my chest. The invisible chain of the survivor. The one that binds you to the people who hurt you, the one that makes you believe if you just endure enough they will finally love you. It shattered right along with that vase. I looked at my father one last time. I didn't see a tycoon. I didn't see a patriarch. I saw a man standing on a foundation of sand, screaming at the tide. "Come on, Elena," I said, my voice steady, almost unrecognizable to my own ears. "We're going home." I walked out those heavy oak doors and into the cool night air, leaving the warmth, the lights, and the family I had spent a lifetime trying to please. I didn't look back. Before I tell you what happened when I walked out that door, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I buckled Elena into the back seat of my nondescript sedan, the one I drove specifically when visiting them so I wouldn't raise questions. She was sobbing quietly, her little body shaking. "It's okay, baby," I told her, meeting her eyes in the rearview mirror. "We're going to a better place. A real home." I didn't drive to a motel. I didn't drive back to the cramped apartment I rented in the city to maintain my cover. I turned onto the Pacific Coast Highway and headed north toward Malibu. The drive was long and dark, the ocean a black void to my left. My phone buzzed incessantly, text from Taylor, probably, maybe a half-hearted scolding from my mother, but I didn't check it. I drove with a clarity that felt like ice water in my veins. We arrived at the gates an hour later. I rolled down the window and punched a code into the keypad. The heavy iron gates swung open silently. I drove up the winding driveway, the headlights sweeping over manicured landscaping, until the house came into view. It wasn't a house. It was a masterpiece of modern architecture, glass and steel perched on the edge of a cliff, overlooking the churning Pacific. My sanctuary. My secret. I parked the car and carried a sleeping Elena inside. The lights blazed on automatically as I entered, illuminating the Italian marble floors, the art collection that rivaled my father's, the expansive living room with its panoramic view of the ocean. I laid Elena down in her bed, a room designed for a princess, filled with the best toys and softest linens money could buy. I kissed her forehead and whispered a promise into the dark. They will never make you feel small again. I walked out to the main deck and poured myself a glass of wine, a vintage far superior to the swill my father had been serving. I leaned against the railing listening to the waves crash below. For years I had played the role they assigned me. The failure. The single mom who made bad choices. The struggling artist. I let them believe it because it was safer. It kept their jealousy at bay. It kept their greed from consuming me. But the truth? I wasn't a freelance designer. I was the founder of Oramed, an AI medical startup I had built from nothing in my garage while Elena slept in a playpen next to my desk. I had sold it 18 months ago for $42 million. Post-tax. I took a sip of wine, the taste sharp and grounding. Why did I hide it? Why did I let them treat me like dirt when I could have bought and sold their entire lifestyle 3 times over? Because of the breadcrumbs. That's how they get you. They starve you of affection, of approval, of basic kindness. And then, just when you're about to break, just when you're ready to walk away, they toss you a crumb. A smile from my mother when I complimented her dress. A nod from my father when I brought a gift he actually liked. A moment of laughter with my sister. Those tiny, insignificant scraps of connection felt like a feast to a starving child. They kept me hooked. They kept me hoping. They normalized the cruelty, making me believe that if I just tried a little harder, if I was just a little more perfect, the crumbs would turn into a meal. It's called intermittent reinforcement. It's the same psychological mechanism that keeps people addicted to gambling. You lose and lose and lose, but that one small win keeps you at the table. I had been gambling with my dignity for 29 years. And tonight the house had finally won. I thought about the mortgage. My father didn't know it, but his private lender, the entity that had refinanced his estate when he was on the brink of bankruptcy 2 years ago, was a holding company. My holding company. I had saved them. I had been quietly paying their bills, funding my brother's reckless hedge fund through shell investors, keeping my sister's influencer lifestyle afloat with anonymous brand deals. I had done it all hoping that one day I could reveal the truth and they would finally love me. Not for the money but for the fact that I had protected them. How stupid. How incredibly, heartbreakingly stupid. I finished my wine and set the glass down on the railing with a decisive click. The sound echoed in the quiet night. The wind whipped my hair around my face, cold and biting. The breadcrumbs were gone. The table was overturned. I wasn't the daughter begging for a seat anymore. I was the landlord. And eviction notices were about to be served. I went back inside and locked the door. For the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel lonely. Felt like power. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling glass of my bedroom, turning the ocean view into a blinding sheet of gold. For a split second in that haze between sleep and waking I forgot. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, expecting the usual emails from my developers or a text from Elena's school. What I found instead was a digital assassination. My notifications were stacked deep. Hundreds of them. Instagram, Facebook, texts from distant cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. My stomach turned over, a cold stone dropping into acid. I opened Instagram first. There was Taylor. My sister, the influencer, the model, the girl who had spent her entire life curating a reality that didn't exist. She had posted a story 3 hours ago. It was a black screen with small white serif font, her signature serious aesthetic. Please pray for my family right now. Addiction and mental health battles are so real and they happen in even the best homes. We are heartbroken but we will never stop loving her. #sisters, #pray for Catalina. I stared at the screen, my pulse thrumming in my ears. Addiction? Mental health battles? I swiped to the next slide. A photo of my mother, Patricia, looking pensive and elegant in her garden, gazing sadly at a rosebush. The caption was a masterpiece of vague toxicity. A mother's love is unconditional even when it is rejected. We did everything we could to help her last night. Now we must let her find her own bottom. We ask for privacy as we deal with this family tragedy. They weren't just explaining away my absence. They were rewriting history. They knew exactly what they were doing. The elite of Montecito had witnessed James throwing me out. They saw the violence of it. To protect their reputation, to keep their standing as the perfect dynasty, they had to make me the villain. Or worse, the victim of my own instability. If I was crazy, if I was on drugs, if I was having a breakdown, then James wasn't a cruel father. He was a concerned patriarch, doing what had to be done. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from an old family friend, Mrs. Galloway. Catalina, honey, I saw Taylor's post. If you need a rehab center recommendation, my nephew went to a wonderful place in Arizona. I didn't throw the phone. I didn't scream. I felt a strange, icy calm wash over me. extinguishing the last ember of guilt I had been holding on to. This was a whisper campaign. It was a tactic James used in business all the time. If a competitor threatened him, he didn't attack their product. He attacked their character. He planted seeds of doubt until no one wanted to do business with them. Now he was using the playbook on his own daughter. They were trying to destroy my credibility so that if I ever tried to tell the truth, that I was the one supporting them, no one would believe me. She's delusional, they would say. She thinks she's a millionaire. It's part of her psychosis. I scrolled through the comments on Taylor's post. So brave of you to share, Tay. Sending love to your poor parents. I always knew there was something off about her. They were mourning me while I was still alive. They were burying my reputation to save their own social standing. I walked into the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't look like a drug addict. I didn't look unstable. I looked like a woman who had just been handed the final piece of evidence she needed to press the button. I went to check on Elena. She was still asleep, safe in her fortress of high thread count sheets. I kissed her cheek, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, grounding myself. They wanted to paint me as a mess? Fine. Let them paint. I wasn't going to pick up a brush. I was going to buy the gallery and burn it down. I walked into my office, a space dominated by a massive teak desk and 3 monitors. This was where the freelance graphic designer vanished and the CEO of Aura Holdings emerged. I sat down and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, a familiar blue light that felt like armor. I didn't log into Instagram. I didn't write a defense post on Facebook. I logged into the secure portal of my private equity firm. The dashboard loaded. Rows of numbers, assets, and liabilities scrolled across the screen. It was a map of my family's entire existence, and they didn't even know I was the cartographer. I pulled up the file labeled Protocol, JPTJ, James, Patricia, Taylor, Jack. First, the house. I navigated to the real estate holding shell company I had established 3 years ago. When James had leveraged the Montecito estate to the hilt to cover bad investments, the bank was days away from foreclosing. I had stepped in through an intermediary, buying the distressed note for pennies on the dollar but keeping the terms active. Technically, James had been missing payments for 6 months. I had been letting it slide, marking them as deferred in the system to keep a roof over their heads. I changed the status from deferred to default. I typed out a memo to my legal team. Initiate immediate foreclosure proceedings. Notice to quit to be served within 24 hours. No grace period. That's it. My brother, the hedge fund genius. He thought he had secured a $2 million seed round from a silent angel investor in Singapore. He loved bragging about his Asian connections. He had no idea the Singapore entity was a subsidiary of Oramed. I pulled up the investment agreement. There was a key man clause and a performance review stipulation that allowed the investor to pull funding if the principal engaged in reputational risk. I attached screenshots of his support for Taylor's smear campaign. I highlighted the clause. Execute clawback provision. Freeze all operating accounts. Demand immediate repayment of principal. And finally, Taylor. She didn't have loans. She had brand partnerships. My marketing arm had been anonymously sponsoring her lifestyle blog for 2 years. Funneling $5,000 a month into her account under the guise of consulting fees for brands I owned stakes in. That money paid for her apartment. It paid for the clothes she was wearing in the photo where she called me an addict. I opened the payroll system. I found her vendor profile. I didn't just cancel the contract. I flagged her vendor ID as fraud/high risk in the shared database used by major marketing agencies. A blacklist that would make it nearly impossible for her to get premium sponsorships again. It was surgical. It was quiet. There was no screaming, no shattered vases, no public scenes. Just the soft tapping of keys in a silent room overlooking the Pacific. I sat back in my chair. My heart rate hadn't even elevated. This wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is messy. This was a correction. This was the market adjusting to new data. They wanted to tell the world I was incompetent. They wanted to say I was a charity case. I closed the laptop. The fan whirred into silence. Let's see how they survive when the charity stops. The phone on my desk didn't ring. It illuminated. It was a secure line, the one reserved for Marcus, my forensic accountant. Marcus doesn't call for small talk. He calls when the numbers stop adding up. We have a discrepancy, he said. His voice was dry, devoid of judgment, just data. Define discrepancy, I replied, leaning forward. Is it a rounding error or a problem? It's a felony, Marcus said. The air in my office seemed to drop 10 degrees. I opened the secure file he had just pushed to my server. It was the audit of my brother Jack's hedge fund, the one I had been anonymously funding for 18 months. I had authorized a forensic sweep as part of the clawback protocol I initiated yesterday. I expected to find bad trades. I expected to find incompetence. Jack was a gambler, not an investor. I knew he was losing money. That's why I kept refilling the pot, trying to save him from his own stupidity. But I wasn't looking at losses. I was looking at theft. Look at line item 402, Marcus instructed. Vendor payments to Apex Strategic Consulting. $300,000 over 6 months. I've never heard of Apex, I said. Neither has the IRS, Marcus countered. It's a shell. The registered agent is a P.O. box in the Caymans. But the IP address used to access the account matches the residential IP of your brother's penthouse. I stared at the screen. The blue light reflected in my eyes, cold and unforgiving. Jack hadn't just been losing my money. He had been stealing it. He had set up a fake vendor, invoiced his own fund for consulting, and wired the capital, my capital, straight into his personal offshore account. He was embezzling from the angel investor, who was keeping him alive. He was robbing his own sister, blind to the fact that the hand he was biting was the only thing holding him above the abyss. This changed everything. Yesterday this was a family dispute. Yesterday this was about teaching them a lesson in humility. Today it was criminal fraud. What are the implications? I asked, though I already knew. Wire fraud. Embezzlement. Money laundering. Marcus listed them off like he was reading a grocery list. If you file a report with the SEC and the FBI, he's looking at 10 years. Minimum. Federal prison isn't like the country club, Catalina. He won't survive it. I sat back in my chair. The silence in the room was heavy, pressing against my eardrums. I thought about Jack at the party, smirking while our father threw me out. I thought about him laughing at my freelance job, calling me a loser while he wore a watch bought with stolen money. He had committed a crime against me. He had unknowingly handed me the weapon that could end his life as he knew it. Do you want me to file the report? Marcus asked. I looked at the digital evidence. It was a smoking gun. It was the end of Jack. No, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. Not yet. Print it. All of it. Bind it in a hard copy. I want the physical proof. Understood, Marcus said, and the line went dead. I wasn't going to send the police to arrest him. That was too easy. That was too impersonal. I wanted him to see it. I wanted him to look me in the eye and realize that the sister he called a disgrace was the only reason he wasn't wearing handcuffs. I held the power of the state in one hand and the power of debt in the other. The game had shifted. I wasn't just the landlord anymore. I was the judge, the jury, and if they pushed me 1 inch further, I would be the executioner. 3 days later, the silence broke. It didn't break with a phone call or an apology letter. It broke with the sound of engines revving at my front gate. I was in the kitchen making tea when the security monitor flashed. They were here. James, Fisher, Vic, Taylor. They looked like refugees from a lifestyle magazine that had gone out of business. James was wearing a wrinkled polo shirt, his face a mask of purple rage. Patricia looked pale, her sunglasses hiding eyes I assumed were red from crying, or from plotting. Jack was pacing, looking manic. Taylor was holding her phone up, probably trying to livestream their confrontation for sympathy. They were banging on the iron gate. I could hear James screaming over the intercom system. Open this gate. I know you're in there. You ungrateful little witch, open this gate right now. I didn't rush. I finished steeping my tea. I checked the security feed to ensure Elena was in the playroom with her noise-canceling headphones on, watching a movie. She didn't need to see this. This wasn't for her. This was the final transaction. I walked to the front door. I picked up the leather-bound folder Marcus had sent over, the ledger. I unlocked the front door and walked down the long stone path toward the gate. They saw me coming. They gripped the bars like prisoners. How dare you? James roared as I approached. How dare you squat in a house like this while your family is being destroyed? Who are you sleeping with to stay here? Is this some boyfriend's house? You need to tell him to call off his lawyers. It's not a boyfriend's house, I said, stopping 5 feet from the gate. I didn't open it. It's mine. Paid for in cash. 3 years ago. The silence that followed was absolute. Taylor lowered her phone. Patricia took a step back. You're lying, Jack spat, his voice cracking. You're a broke freelancer. You can't afford a mailbox in this zip code. I held up the folder. I opened it to the first page, the deed to the Montecito estate. I own the mortgage on your house, James, I said, my voice calm, carrying over the sound of the ocean. I bought the distressed note 2 years ago when you defaulted. I've been the one letting you sleep there for free. And I'm the one who just initiated foreclosure. James turned the color of ash. He gripped the gate for support. I turned the page. And Taylor. The brand partnerships that pay your rent? That's my marketing firm. I canceled the contracts. And I flagged you as a fraud risk. You won't get another sponsorship in this industry. Taylor let out a small choked sob. I turned the final page. I looked at Jack. The angel investor from Singapore? That's me. Jack froze. His eyes darted from me to the folder. And this, I said, tapping the spreadsheet of his wire transfers, is the record of the $300,000 you embezzled from me. I have the wire traces. I have the IP logs. I have the affidavit prepared for the FBI. Jack dropped to his knees. It wasn't metaphorical. He literally collapsed onto the asphalt. Catalina, wait, he stammered, tears streaming down his face. Wait, please. I didn't know. I didn't know it was you. Would it have mattered if it was a stranger? I asked. You stole. You committed a felony. And you used that money to buy a watch to wear while you called me a failure. Please, Patricia begged, finding her voice. She reached through the bars, her hand trembling. Catalina, we're your family. You can't destroy us. We're blood. I'm not destroying you, I said. I'm just stopping the subsidy. You wanted me to be a disgrace? Fine. I'm a disgrace. But I'm a solvent disgrace. And you are bankrupt. I looked at them, really looked at them for the last time. They weren't monsters. They were just small, greedy people who had gotten used to eating at a table they didn't pay for. You have 30 days to vacate the Montecito property, I told James. Jack, if you ever come near me or my daughter again, I file the report. That is the only mercy you will get from me. Catalina. James screamed, a desperate, broken sound. I turned around. I walked back up the driveway. I didn't run. I didn't look back. I heard them shouting, begging, crying behind me, but the sounds faded as I reached the heavy oak door of my home. I stepped inside and closed the door. The lock clicked into place. It was over. The empire didn't fall with a bang. It fell with a series of quiet, legal whimpers. The Montecito house was listed for auction within the month. The gossip columns in Santa Barbara had a field day with the tragic financial collapse of the family, though they never found out who pulled the trigger. James and Patricia moved into a 2-bedroom condo in a retirement community in Arizona, a place they used to mock. Taylor had to get a job as a receptionist at a dental office because her influencer career evaporated overnight. Jack avoided prison, but he was living in a studio apartment working construction, paying me back every cent of the $300,000 in court-ordered restitution. I didn't feel joy watching it. It's clean. Like a fever had finally broken. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of my Malibu home. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violets and burnt oranges. Elena was sitting at the patio table drawing a picture of the ocean. She looked happy. Lighter. I held a tablet in my hand, but I wasn't looking at foreclosure notices anymore. I was looking at the launch page for the Sanctuary Grant. It was a new venture capital fund I had established with the $42 million from the sale of Oramed. But it wasn't for tech bros or hedge funds. It was exclusively for single mothers. Women who had been underestimated, women who were trying to build businesses while raising children alone, women who needed a seat at the table. I wasn't just giving them money. I was giving them the network, the legal protection, and the mentorship I never had. This was the justice of the sower. Punishing my family was necessary for my survival, but it wasn't my legacy. If I had stopped at revenge, I would have just been the person who burned down a house. I wanted to be the person who built a village. I walked over to Elena and sat down next to her. What are you drawing? I asked. I'm drawing us, she said, pointing to 2 stick figures standing on a giant cliff. And I'm drawing a big wall so the bad people can't come in. I smiled and kissed the top of her head. The wall is good, baby. But you know what else we need? What? A door, I said, looking out at the horizon. So we can let the good people in. I had built my own table. I had carved it out of the wreckage of my past. And now, I was going to make sure that no other woman had to beg for a seat ever again. If you've ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat, share this story. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you're building for yourself right now?